Well, howdy folks, it's me again. Time for another brief little video on RSV4 modifications and maintenance. So as you can probably tell, I've just pulled the fork leg out of my bike. For those of you not familiar, this is a 2013 Aprilia RSV4 factory, and it's about time for these forks to get a refresh. So the seals are actually not leaking. They're in pretty good shape. The bike's only done 3,700 miles, and all but 100 miles of that has been on the track, which is actually easier on the bike, generally speaking, than the street, because you don't get potholes on the track, at least not on good tracks. And I've done more miles on Circuit of the Americas on this bike than in the other track, so that's about as smooth as they get. But even though it's only done 3,700 miles, it's also pushing 4 years old, and that is definitely good time for refreshing the oil in the forks and the suspension in general, because after all, suspension oil or fluid is just like engine oil. It does degrade and deteriorate over time. This friction inside the forks does create particulate debris inside the oil, or that is picked up by the oil inside the fork. So it's a good idea to swap it out and keep it fresh. So as you can see, I've already measured the preload on this fork. It's 12.5 turns out. Sorry, it's 12.5 turns to fully extended. So when I reinstall, I'll wind it in 12.5 times, and the adjuster in here is 5 turns from fully in. Now, now that I've measured those, I can pull the cap. Now I actually used the bottom clamp down here as a vise. So while this fork leg was locked in there, I loosened these two bolts so that this top section was not being gripped. And then I used my special fork cap tool, to loosen the fork cap. This is it right here. So this, yeah, there we go, nice and loose. So what we will do is, the preload's all the way out. I can remove the tube. There we go. And that reveals the lock nut and the actual cap and the spring. So what we have to do now is compress this to get access to that nut down there in order for the cap to come off, the spring to come off, and we'll get the oil out and we'll replace it with some new number 10. So the best way to do that, I have found, is to use this handy dandy little tool. It's not exactly what it was designed for, but it still works a treat. This is designed for standard Showa Japanese forks that have a steel tube up here with 2 holes in either side. But a spring is a spring, and springs can be compressed. So we'll just wind that in a fraction. There we go. Look at our 17mm wrench and our socket. What is this? 17 and 17. There we go. Now this can sometimes be a little tricky if one comes loose and the other one doesn't, but in this case the cap is loose and the lock nut is loose, so we should be good to go. What do you say we back off a little spring tension? Oh, no, that's not what I meant. Extension. Okay, so here we go. The cap is unscrewing, but we're not getting any. The rod is rotating with the cap, so let's do this. So we just need to do a little jiggling. There. As simple as that. Now this is loose. There we go. Now, there's the beauty of this simplicity of this mechanism. That's the damper that this adjuster in here pushes down on. So it just pushes on this tube, and down the bottom is a needle with a spring underneath it. The further in that needle is pressed, the smaller the orifice is that the oil has to travel through. So because the orifice is smaller, the oil gets greater resistance. The oil creates greater resistance, so the damping is increased. Okay. There we go. Oh, don't want to drop that. Now, we need something to, this is going to drip a little, oop, like that. Now, I'm not going to use a cotton cloth. That will just introduce debris into the mechanism. These microfiber cloths, nylon, very little to no particulates. Okay, so now I've got a little container. Now the pin, or the needle, the damping needle is inside the rod. There it is. So we'll clean that up, make a mess, clean that up too. And it's not too bad. I mean, I've seen much worse, and it doesn't stink. Sometimes when oil is sitting in forks for years and years and years, it just reeks when it comes out. This, you can still smell that it smells like suspension fluid. So we'll pump the rest of the fluid out. Now I've got seals for these. Kind of seems like a waste of time to pull this all apart and not replace the seals. Okay, so that sounds like just about all the fluid's out of the cartridge, but we will leave it to drain for a while. Okay, Now, it's good to measure how much is coming out, but that's not the critical issue. You can't be as precise by measuring what's come out as you can by setting the height, which actually we will do with this and with this. I'll just hook up my bleeder syringe. I'll look up the value of the distance from the top of the fork tube to the oil, and I can set that height to the number on this graduated tube. You probably can't see that. Those of us who are over, those of us whose warranty has expired are having trouble reading those numbers. But 130, 160, 170, 180, yeah, so I'll set the height there, set it on top of the tube, and then just make sure it's overfilled, and then draw out the fluid with the syringe so that when it starts to suck dry, that's it. There we've got the right fork oil height. Then we reinstall the spring, damper tube, everything else, and we're good to go. So for now, I'm going to leave that to drain. I'll pull the other one and start the reinstallation. So yeah, I might make that video number 2. So stay tuned.